Agenda item 5 is recorded by Hansard. Apologies have been received from Dominic Bradley, Caleb Boyle and Peter Weir. Draft minutes, pages 5 to 9. Members content to an accurate record. Agreed. Yep. Matters arising. Can I remind members that at its meeting in April, the committee agreed to write to Cerberus Capital Management, inviting it to brief the committee on its role within the local economy following its acquisition of the investment portfolio from NAMA. A response from CCM can be found at page 11 of your packs. State that they are willing to brief the committee if this is held in camera, given the confidentiality considerations that they have. So can I take members' views on whether they are content to proceed on this basis, or whether the committee should reply asking that a short introductory briefing is held in open session, covering the work of Cerberus in general terms, followed by a briefing in closed session as they've requested. Happy enough with that. Table request then pages 12 to 18 of your packs for noting. Moving on then to the report on air connectivity. Can I refer members to documentation at pages 33 through to 136 of your packs. And can I welcome the witnesses to the table? Today we have John Sims from the Economic Policy Division within DETI, Mr Tony Simpson from the Strategic Policy Division in DFP, and Gareth Hetherington, the Associate Director of the Ulster University Economic Policy Centre. You're all very welcome to the committee this morning. Can I ask if you want to make some brief opening comments in regard to your own work in regard to this, but also in response to the issues that have been raised by the airports and the tourism sector. I'm sure you've got a copy of the comments that were made at our previous session, and how you'd like to respond to some severe criticism that they had of the report.
Okay, Chair. Well, thanks for the opportunity to brief the committee on this matter. At the outset, can I apologise that the departmental response hasn't been received to the clerk's letter for last month. Hopefully that should be with you shortly. And I'll also like to thank the committee for providing the evidence that was supplied by the industry representatives that were at the committee session last month. As the committee will have seen, the submissions highlight only industry concerns about the impact of APD, and as you've said, Chair, they also raise a number of issues in relation to the Ulster University study in air connectivity, and in particular the approach that was taken to assessing the economic impact of cutting or reducing APD. The Ulster University have provided a response to the Mott MacDonald report, and you will get that as part of the department's response. Gareth is here with us from the Ulster University and will provide, by way of opening comments, a bit of an overview of that response, and no doubt we'll discuss that later. Having considered the Mott MacDonald report and the Ulster University response, it's our view that the research that's been undertaken by UU does indeed provide a reasonable assessment of the potential economic benefits of cutting APD, and we'll get into that in the session. And as the committee will recall, the UU research concluded that there was not a strong case for the devolution of short-haul APD for a number of reasons, including the high levels of deadweight, essentially where we'd be funding a tax cut for those who would travel anyway, either to Northern Ireland or from Northern Ireland, the costs, which are quite significant in terms of the block adjustment that would be required, and also the uncertainties that there are around whether and how the benefits would materialise. So, rather, UU have suggested a more targeted intervention would be more appropriate, such as the use of our route development fund, and we have John from DETI here who might just kind of touch on that later. With the Chair's permission, I'll ask Gareth to make some opening remarks from a UU perspective on their response to the Mott MacDonald critique. But before I do, I would like to clarify one issue where I think there could be some confusion. I'm aware that the Belfast International Airport quoted some figures in the media, and they were touched on in the committee session, stating that reducing APD could create 3,800 jobs and add 200 million per year to the economy. It's my understanding that these figures relate to Scotland and were as part of a report published by Edinburgh Airport. So, and I also understand they relate to the perceived benefits of cutting APD, but perhaps not reflecting the costs that would be associated with devolving and cutting the tax. So I just wanted to be clear that they don't relate to Northern Ireland and differ
So you're saying those exact figures are the exact figures for Scotland?
They're from a Scottish report.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're content, Chair, that's all I'd say, and I'll hand to Gareth.
Any comments just now before we...
Doesn't make it much more clear, but we're getting there late at the end, yeah.
Okay, Gareth.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. I just want to make a few quick opening comments, and then obviously there will be a lot of questions that I'll endeavour to answer. Firstly, by way of background then, the Ulster University Economic Policy Centre is an independent economic research centre, formerly called the Northern Ireland Centre for Economic Policy, which is the branding which was on the original report, so we're the same unit. Our remit is to provide balanced advice to government on the impact of policy decisions, and by that we mean both, and in this particular instance it means looking at both the economic benefits and the economic costs associated with devolving APD. As Mr Simpson already alluded to, we have provided detailed information to DFP in response to the Belfast International Airport critique, and that response paper deals with each of the individual issues raised in their paper. And I suppose in summary, we do not accept the comments that have been made by Mott MacDonald. And we're happy and content to stand over the conclusions made. I'm sure we'll have a lot of individual questions in terms of the approach that has been taken. A couple of comments just that I would make by way of introduction. First of all, there was the suggestion that there was a calculation error in our report. That's not, in fact, the case. We had taken an approach and agreed with DETI, and that was something that wasn't understood by Mott MacDonald. The second point...
Just on that point, what was that exactly?
You want me to go into the detail?
Yeah.
What was the calculation error?
Yeah.
So what had happened was we looked at two tax scenarios. We looked at, and we calculated what we think the tax that Northern Ireland contributes in terms of APD to Treasury, and then also there's the HMRC estimate of tax that Northern Ireland contributes in respect of APD. So there's two tax scenarios. Three of the options that we looked at, one of those options was actually to increase APD. And if we had made the assumption that if APD was to be increased, it would deliver a net economic cost to Treasury, or sorry, to the Northern Ireland economy. There would be a net economic cost. And therefore, we assumed and agreed with DETI that the executive would only agree to take forward an increase in APD if they could maximise the amount of revenue that you would raise for other spending. And so in the detailed part of the report, we identified what the lower tax revenue raised and the higher tax revenue raised. When we then went into the summary section of the report, we only included the higher tax on the basis that would be on the assumption that would be the only basis that you would take that forward. And so, as a result of that, that's what we included in the summary report. When Mott MacDonald looked at it, they just saw the difference and said, "Oh, they haven't carried forward the lower tax. They've used the higher tax cost in both instances," and they interpreted that as a calculation error. But it was an assumption that we had used in the report. So that's to deal with that specific calculation error. A couple of other points then, just to raise. Mott MacDonald have talked about the currency of the data in some of the report, and they've made mention of the fact that we've, in some instances, we've used outdated data. The key area that this refers to in terms of the report is in respect to the use of 2006 Civil Aviation Authority data for the passenger forecasts. I think it's important for the committee to understand a number of things. First of all, the 2006 data is the latest passenger survey information that we have available for Northern Ireland. But the committee should be assured that where more recent information has been available, that York Aviation in their passenger forecasts used that more up-to-date information. It's also probably important to know that the reason that we had to rely on the 2006 data was because Northern Ireland airports did not take part in the annual passenger survey after that date. So it was because of a decision that the airports made that we were required to use that. But it's only a part of the overall information used. The committee shouldn't think that we're just sitting using solely a 2006 data set. We've used much more recent information than that. That's the second point. My final just comment is, I think in terms of the criticism that came from the airports, there's a strong suggestion that we have been too cautious or too prudent in terms of the assumptions that we've used in our report. Again, we would reject that argument. Our remit and in terms of providing independent economic policy advice is always to be to provide a realistic and reasonable answer and use realistic assumptions. So I would suggest that, and in each of the assumptions, we can go through them one by one if you like, we have neither been too pessimistic nor too optimistic, but sought to be realistic in each of the options. So thank you, Chair, for the time to give those opening comments.
One point that Mott MacDonald has raised is the use of the Scottish input-output tables.
Yes.
And it said that your reports relied on the 2009 tables, citing the fact that they were the latest available. They're saying that the 2011 SIO tables were available at the time too. Were they wrong, or were you wrong on that point?
So, no, we used the 2009 tables information for the analysis. An important aspect in respect of input-output tables, it isn't critical that you use the latest information. Now, if we were doing the report today, we would use the 2011 tables. The reason that it's not critical is because year on year, the multipliers in the input-output tables change very, very marginally. There's very low volatility in
but just change. In this point where they're stating that you stated the 2009 figures are the latest available, are you now admitting that they weren't the latest available, that was 2011?
Whenever we did the data search was at the beginning of last year, the 2009 figures were the latest available. But since then, and shortly before the publication of the report, the 2011 information became available. But what is important for the committee to understand is that it isn't essential when you're doing this to use the latest figures because there's such low volatility. And we then went back and looked at the 2011 numbers to see if it would have made any material impact, and there would have been no change to the net impact. There are a number of different types of benefits. The indirect benefit would have been marginally lower, but the induced benefit would have been marginally higher by the equivalent amount. So using the 2011 data wouldn't have changed the results in any way.
The airports were extremely concerned at the situation that we're now in, where Dublin Airport is now reporting an increase of 47% in terms of passengers from the north travelling from Dublin in the first 6 months of 2014. What's your own assessment of what the key drivers are for that? And is your view then that regardless of APD, that drive towards Dublin will still proceed anyway?
I think there's... I'll take this initially, and then if you have a comment. Our report looks at passenger flows through Northern Ireland airports as opposed to passenger flows through Dublin. But obviously Dublin's relevant to the analysis. There are a number of factors, obviously, that are driving passengers or people from Northern Ireland to use Dublin Airport. One factor, if it's cheaper, clearly, then that's an attractive proposition. But Dublin offers much greater connectivity, much greater choice, and much greater number of direct flights. So that's also a very important factor in terms of people's decision making. In terms of how that factors into our report and the passenger numbers in our report, based on the numbers that York Aviation provided us, it's estimated that if APD were to be halved, so we looked at a number of options, the half, 50% reduction and the 100% reduction. If it was reduced by 50%, there would be approximately 230,000 additional passengers who currently use Dublin would use Northern Ireland airports. That's if it was halved. If it was abolished, if APD was abolished, then the number would be closer to about 330,000. So we recognise a lot of what the airports are saying in terms of the positive impact a reduction or abolition of APD would have on passenger numbers, and we don't dispute that.
If I can just add to what Gareth has said, there's no doubt that the numbers of Northern Ireland residents using Dublin is increasing, and there's a range of factors. It's a major European capital city. Dublin had 24 million passengers before the economic crash. It's now back up to about 21.5 million, as Gareth says. It can offer many more destinations than we can, and that we couldn't sustain from here. But from our point of view, there's it's a challenge but an opportunity. So if people are, for example, using Dublin to fly to Germany, there's that leakage issue. It's persuading the airlines to travel from Northern Ireland to Germany. If it's Canada, it's the same scenario. It's using that information to try and persuade the airlines. And what is a difficult climate at the minute? It's not the same as it was before the economic crash when you had the sort of the budget airline boom. It's much more competitive out there now, and it's how we use that information to persuade the airlines that it makes more sense to fly from here directly to Germany and Canada and other places rather than go to Dublin. So there is that. It's a challenge, but there's an opportunity there for us.
Yeah, but surely you're not going to get. You're looking for the passengers to go from the north, but you're not going to get the airlines unless if APD is abolished. There's more chance the airlines coming to the north as well as the passengers.
I suppose one of the key messages to get across from the NICEP report is that it does demonstrate benefits, and that's one of the messages I think is important to get across. If you get rid of APD, the report says you'll have a 12% increase in passenger numbers. Now that's delivered by airlines putting on increased capacity, putting on new routes. There's no doubt that you get an economic benefit, 55, 60 million pounds to the economy. The flip side is because it's a UK tax, that comes out of the block grant, and that's what the report is saying. There are definite benefits here, but if it comes out of the Northern Ireland block, that cost more or less offsets the benefits. So there are benefits. If your point, if there's no APD, you would have a significant increase in Northern Ireland passenger numbers. But what Northern Ireland ministers are saying to Treasury is we shouldn't have to pay for it, because if we do, it comes off the balance sheet effectively.
And does the same apply to Scotland as well then?
The same will apply to Scotland.
No, what I'm saying is if Scotland were to get APD and abolish it, then it would still be a greater cost to them, so it's not a risk for them worth taking in the same way that you're saying there's not a risk worth taking for ourselves.
If you want to take it,
No, I suppose the response to that, Chair, is yes, that the funding arrangements would be the same. The European rules are the same for Scotland and for ourselves, so they would require block grant adjustment. In terms of the choice, it's a choice for ministers to make, recognising the impact that the cost would have on the public finances, and a decision as to whether or not that's the most appropriate way to achieve whatever the policy objectives are, be they using it as an economic lever or a way to increase our connectivity, or as perhaps the debate in Scotland as a means of increasing fiscal accountability, where there's a great emphasis on that, and that's a key motivating factor for a lot of the devolution activity that there is in Scotland.
Given some of the criticisms of how this analysis was run, is it feasible to rerun the analysis using the mid or average values instead?
Well, we would argue that when we talk about mid or average values, in terms of the analysis and the assumptions that we've done, we have taken what we consider to be realistic. We haven't, the airports of Mott MacDonald are of the view that we've always been at the pessimistic, at the bottom end of the scale. We would suggest that actually in many instances there's a strong case that we could have gone further, and we didn't, because we didn't want to be too pessimistic. I mean, certainly we could, and in some of the sensitivity analysis we looked at, well, what would happen if the benefits were larger, and yeah, that will give you a more positive picture. That it's going to increase the economic benefits in the analysis. But once you start to move to a more optimistic scenario, you're moving into an outcome that's potentially more unlikely. And in terms of what would government do? We wanted to be absolutely, well, not absolutely, but reasonably sure that the benefits that we have calculated in here would be achieved if APD was abolished or reduced. Yeah.
Okay. Leslie?
You just follow that on. Are you saying then that you were pessimistic all the time?
No, sorry. What I'm saying is we weren't. No, what I'm saying is that
Were you
I think,
optimistic any of the time?
no, I think we were realistic all the time.
What does
we
that
were
mean?
neither.
No.
Well,
That mean mid-range, does it?
Pessimistic, optimistic, realistic. Yeah,
You're in the middle, you think, between the two?
I believe so. Yes.
Mr. Sims referred to the similar situation in Scotland, but surely with the Highlands and Islands derogations, a different scenario altogether?
The Highlands and Islands, its exemption is for lifeline services effectively, so the Treasury has designated that legally. It's 13.5 people per square kilometre, whereas we're 122, and it's only for aircraft that carry 20 passengers or less. Now, us getting that sort of designation might be difficult to achieve.
No, we obviously we haven't got it, but it would make a difference in comparing, you know, the Northern Ireland situation with Scotland as a whole. You were suggesting it would be much the same.
Well, I think in terms of I don't have the detail of the exact numbers flying from the Highlands and Islands, but Edinburgh and Glasgow Airport, they're the lion's share. You've got Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, and then you've got Prestwick. They're the lion's share of traffic. So it doesn't apply to them. It only applies to lifeline services between literally the Highlands and Islands, where you need probably frequently a subsidy or a public service obligation to maintain those services. Edinburgh and Glasgow and Prestwick and Aberdeen and Dundee don't benefit from an APD
No.
exemption.
But have you any idea what the contribution is from the Highlands and Islands? What percentage would it be?
I don't, but we can certainly find that out, I'm sure.
The other thing concerns me, the chair's covered, you know, I guess most of the main points, as usual. But one of the criticisms which concerned me was that they did, talking about Mott MacDonald, saying that in your case, a lot of unexplained methodology. Could you perhaps clarify that?
I think that in terms of the level of information provided in this report and the methodological approach taken, the amount of detail would be in line with the amount of detail that's provided in other economic impact assessments. And where Mott MacDonald were raising this issue was because they wanted to rerun the numbers. The purpose of a report is to report findings. It isn't necessarily to give an independent organisation all the information to be able to run through and rerun each of the calculations. Obviously, we did this report for DETI and for DFP, and in going through and in doing the work, we discussed this with officials and economists within both departments as we were going through it. So the methodological approach was being explained to our primary departments and the recipients of the information so that they understood what we were doing. If we were to go into the level of detail that I think Mott MacDonald would have requested, this would have been a 500-page report. You know, it would have been completely out with the what is typically provided in an impact assessment report.
It's an impact assessment report.
Yeah, it's a report to report the findings. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other members? Okay, just in terms of the conclusions that you've reached in pages 64 and 65 of the report. You've outlined a number of risks and uncertainties associated with the reduction in APD and a number of areas that would need further work. before a fully informed position is reached. So is there any work planned in that respect? And what information do we have in regard to projections in terms of, for example, further foreign and direct investment arising from a reduction in APD and an increased possibility of routes into Germany, into Canada and so on?
I can make some general comments in terms of FDI, but that's mainly a question directed for Daddy. I mean, obviously, one of the identified benefits from reducing APD is enhanced connectivity and routes into business, which would include routes into business destinations. The analysis found that if you reduce APD in Northern Ireland, what that's likely to do is encourage greater numbers of people from Northern Ireland to travel out. It's going to encourage greater outbound travel than inbound travel, and because leisure travellers are much more price sensitive than business travellers, it actually encourages more leisure travel than business travel. So therefore the notion that reducing or abolishing APD would create significant numbers of new links or new destinations to business cities is less likely, and it was from that.
But surely the two overlap. I mean, if people are going to Germany for leisure,
yes,
and there's no route to Germany, then obviously opens up a route in foreign direction for business.
I agree that that's true, but there are also, from a route destination point of view, you've got your business destinations and you have your bucket and spade destinations, and I think when you look at the analysis, and given that it's going to increase leisure travel, the additional destinations are more likely to be bucket and spade destinations. And I suppose to give an example would be from a long-haul APD perspective. When long-haul APD was abolished, obviously the New York service was maintained, but the only other direct long-haul services are very small numbers of flights to Egypt, to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and to Orlando. Those are leisure destinations. Those are not business destinations that you're giving examples, for example, for Germany or to Berlin or those types of destinations.
If I can just add to what Gareth said, outbound leisure is also important in terms of route connectivity, because say you have a route to Germany and the plane is 80% load factor, and 50 or 60% of that is people from here. The airline needs that to be sustainable. It's the 20% of people from Germany that fly in that provide the £250 per person per trip. So there is that factor there. And to take Germany as the example again, what we might not be looking at is a new service into a major hub airport twice a day, which is what business people are looking for. It could well be that it's a 2, 3, 4 times a week to an inbound tourism destination in the first instance. But in terms of the report itself, the passenger increases are reflected in that. It reflects that you will get increased capacity, you will get routes. It would be for the airlines themselves to bring those forward. And in applying APD, first of all, but I suppose as a general point, you have 3.5 million people fly out from Northern Ireland each year, so that they would get the rate applied no matter what. And your point, Mr. Cree, about assumptions, the NICEP report does say that within 2 years, airlines will pass the entire cost on, which I think is a good assumption to have. And effectively, the airlines are saying that if this was devolved and we got rid of it, they would pass that on to passengers, but which is a positive assumption.
Martin?
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm sorry I missed the start of the presentation, but as you know, we've discussed this report previously. I'm wondering just if you would like to gaze into your crystal ball and tell me how you see the development of the international airport here over the next 5 years. When we met the gentlemen from the international airport, they talked about if they could put on 1 million extra passengers, they believe they could create 1,000 jobs. Your report disputes that figure, but that's their figure anyway, and I regard them as the experts in this matter. But how do you see the development, in particular vis-a-vis Dublin, over the next 5 years? See large growth, fast growth, optimistic, pessimistic, realistic?
I see growth at the international, and if you look at the number of new routes that have come forward from the international, Wizz Air is a new airline in the international. We work closely with the international, and they're out all the time looking to get routes in, they're proactive, they're active. There's the new airline in Wizz. EasyJet announced a major increase in seat capacity. Those are positive noises coming forward. there's no doubt there's a challenge, and Dublin is a challenge. But it's not just about air passenger duty, as some people would make the argument. The road network is now so good. You know, you can get from bus from here to Dublin. Dublin Airport is actively marketing in Northern Ireland.
I've made the point before at this committee, the road goes both ways.
Yeah.
So how come they're not marketing down there? If the road's good to get to Dublin, is the road similarly not good to get from Dundalk or Drogheda or Monaghan to Belfast International? Or is it only go one way?
No, the road goes both ways, but Dublin provides much more connectivity than you would get for Belfast International. And Belfast International and Belfast City and City of Derry are not looking to be Dublin. I suppose that's one of the important things to say. We're looking to be achievable. We need direct access, as much direct access as possible. We need direct access into Scandinavia, into Germany, into certain parts of Northern Europe for business and inbound tourism perspective. Belfast International is key to that. There's no doubt about that at all. And they're actively out there looking to get those routes in. A couple of things that we can help them with. We support our airports at World Routes conferences. So, for example, we'll be supporting the International in Durban in September. We organise Northern Ireland Stand. And you'll have heard about the European Routes Conference, which is coming in 2017. That's a very significant conference to have, not just for Belfast, but for Northern Ireland. And it was an example of government, Visit Belfast, the airports all working together. I mean, that effectively is, you've got two conferences in the world annually that bring our airlines together with airports. You have World Routes and you have European Routes. We have managed to get European Routes, which will be a major move for 2017.
And I take your point. In fact, the last time we discussed this, I made the point I really do think the airports need to up their game as well, that they can't blame it all on APD. But you would agree that air passenger duty is a barrier, is a brake on their development?
As the report says, if we didn't have to pay for the tax, you would have a 12% increase in passenger numbers, and you would have 55, 60 million extra into the economy. Because it's a UK tax and under the Azores criteria, we would have to pay for it. That's when the things tend to balance out.
So it is a brake on the development of it is a brake on the development of the airports, and a brake on the development of our economy and our tourism.
I think it's fair to say ministers, the Deputy Minister and the Finance Minister will frequently say, and they've spoken to the Treasury, it's a tax that has an unfair impact on Northern Ireland. Their argument is that it has to be dealt with at a UK level. And I think what you might see developing is, because Scotland, Smith Commission has said Scotland will get it devolved, Treasury is shortly to come out with a consultation, we understand, about the regions of England, because there's now a knock-on effect where the various regions are looking to see, well, how is this going to impact on them? Newcastle Airport's worried about what's happening north of the border. We haven't seen the content of that consultation at this stage, but
So I think Tony wants to come in. So you agree it's a break, and we have switched economy ministers and finance ministers. We haven't heard them repeat their disappointment at this tax. But you agree it's a break on development of the airports, break on the tourism development, a break on economic development. Does Tony want to come in then as well about? Do you agree it's a good tax for London?
Well, it certainly raises significant revenue for the UK Exchequer. To reiterate John's point, it is a view that the ministers have said that they think it should be it's imposed at the UK level. We believe it should be tackled at the UK level because that would bring benefits for the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland. In terms of
what does that mean? What does that mean, tackle at the UK level? What do you mean?
Reduced across the UK as a whole.
But sure,
rather than leaving it to the devolved administrations to reduce it wherever then we would have to take the block.
Well, we wouldn't have to, of course. It's a matter of negotiation where the pain falls. In this case, the tax is very good for London. It's a typical case of a tax which is devised by English ministers, which is good for London in particular. And Heathrow, I'm sure, is delighted with it. It was, of course, we started. It was supposed to be a green tax, but that's long forgotten. But surely the way to tackle it is the devolved regions saying this, and then we need to discuss where the pain falls. I mean, there wasn't much discussion about it when it was introduced. Why would you have to take all the pain if it's removed?
Well, if we were seeking to devolve it, the European rules around how you devolve taxes are quite strict. So we would, under EU rules, we would, as per corporation tax, we would have to take a block adjustment equivalent to the tax receipts foregone. So there'd be limited scope for us to negotiate down the cost of that.
But that should still be a matter of negotiation, surely.
Well, the European rules give little flexibility there. It's quite. We would need to take a block adjustment equivalent to tax receipts foregone. So that would still be significant. What we would rather see is this tax reduce across the UK, where we would reap the benefits, but not having an associated block adjustment. And I suppose in terms of your point, Martine, about whether it's an inhibitor, well, I think it's clear from the research that yes, it does have a negative impact on connectivity and on passenger travel. But I suppose the question is whether or not reducing it and bearing that cost is the most effective way of tackling that issue. If we're trying to grow our economy, is incurring a 60 million block adjustment for APD the most effective way of doing that, or other things such as our development funds, which as John has suggested, or are there broader things that we could use that money on in terms of trying to improve the economy? So that's a choice for ministers to make. Where do you get your biggest return? I suppose where's the biggest bang for the buck?
Well, it really goes down, I suppose, to the block grant and who controls that. But it seems to me that the effect on the growth of the airport, the growth of tourism, the growth of the economy is manifold. As well as that, of course, our added difficulty at this time is that we're trying to create a buzz about Belfast, and when people talk about leisure tourism, business tourism, it's really where you can get too fast, grow an image of a city which is on the move, fastest growing knowledge economy in Europe, and the more connectivity you have, the better that is for the city. And this seems to me to inhibit that, and it's a classic case of a decision taken in London, which is good for London, but certainly not good for whatever about Glasgow and Edinburgh, certainly not good for Belfast.
Just in terms of the figures on page 56 of your report, I just want to clarify for members, 50% reduction would cost us 26.1 million for this year, and you're saying that the income effect is 4.4 million. What does that consist of, the income effect?
Okay, so the income effect is if APD was reduced, it would mean that local people don't have to pay it, so therefore they've got the £6.50 in their pocket. So that's an income effect. That's a positive benefit to local people because they don't have to pay the tax. So, albeit
that doesn't take into account the wider economic.
No, the income effect doesn't take into that's just a fiscal, a taxation point. So there's the amount of money that's taken out of the block grant, but then there's the amount of money that local people are better off because they didn't have to pay the tax. In terms of the wider benefits, that's dealt with in the economic benefits section.
But is there an estimate of what the income effect is coupled with the overall economic impact, so we can balance it out?
In terms of how the analysis is done, so what we've done, we've got the government spend impact, which is a negative, then we've got the income effect, which is a positive, and then you've got the net impact, the net government impact. So the summary table sets out, it includes all those aspects. It includes the wider economic benefits you were talking about. It includes the fiscal or cost to the block grant, but also the positive income effect.
Of course, the figures in terms of the government spend are based on Treasury figures.
Right, no, well, we have two tables. One, so in table 514, which I think is the one you're looking at.
Yep.
So that's based on our estimates and the York Aviation passenger estimates of what the tax impact would be. The table on the next page, 515, is based on the HMRC, and you can see that the government spend impact's greater there. In comparison to those two tables.
Chair, can I comment on that? Just help us with this. I mean, the figures, we don't know what the figures are, or we do know what the figures are exactly for tax income from APD last year?
We don't have them exactly. We're taking this from the HMRC report where their estimates.
We don't have figures?
No. Not precise figures, no.
Well, are they guesses or are they figures? I mean, this man here talks about trust and transparency. Are they figures or are they not figures? Because we're basing a lot of assumptions here on figures from APD income. So let's talk about what we actually have, which is accurate.
Okay, so in terms of how the APD is raised centrally, it's money that goes straight to Treasury. At the minute, there isn't precise calculations for what is raised in each of the regions across the UK. what HMRC do is they allocate, they have at a relatively high level, they allocate what they think is the tax revenues across each of the devolved administrations and England.
So
that's a high-level estimate.
So the guys, I'm very impressed by high-level estimates rather than low-level estimates, but the guys who devise the tax, they decide how much, if we ask them, but there are no exact figures. So how do we negotiate with these people about the amount of pain we would take or wouldn't take when we don't actually know how much it costs?
So what we're suggesting is, one, Treasury's opening position is likely to be the HMRC estimate, but from the passenger numbers that we're looking at and the travelling at different whether it's premium class or economy class, we believe we have got a much more accurate estimate of the level of APD that's raised in Northern Ireland. So the work that York Aviation did and we did would, in effect, I think would form a good basis to start that negotiation with Treasury.
Would you agree that maybe it might be good if we actually had exact figures for these matters? Not blaming you on this, but it would be nice if when we're talking to London we knew exactly, rather than the people who devise the tax telling us this is how much you aren't gaining from it or losing from it. Would it be, do you agree it'd be useful to have exact figures for these matters?
And all these things and the kind of broader debate around fiscal powers, yes, I agree with you. It would be preferable if we had a direct account of the precise level of taxation that's raised in Northern Ireland. But the UK tax system hasn't been designed to produce, to reasonably identify the taxes raised. So what we have are estimates based on the best methodology that can be devised at the time using the information. Now, we are engaging with HMRC across the piece, and colleagues in the other devolved administrations. We're working with Scotland because it's a similar issue for them.
Do you agree it's a very difficult way to do business?
In all these things, it would be better to have perfect information. Where we don't, what we endeavour to do is get the best information possible with the systems that are in place to produce that information. But yes, I concur. I concur. We want the best information we can to help inform our decisions.
Can I just add to what Gareth was saying, just to probably explain a bit more about the 55 million? As in many things, Northern Ireland is unique within the UK, and our travel patterns unique. So we're predominantly low-cost travel. We're predominantly what would have been called budget travel before, whereas in the UK you have much more of a premium class. So, for example, an APD, on short-haul APD, there's two rates. There's £13 and there's 26. 26 is the 13 is reduced, 26 is standard. We don't have an awful lot of the 26 travellers, and likewise we don't have the same long-haul profile that you would get in GB. We have a few direct links, but primarily our long haul then will be connecting, and there's just not the same profile. So whenever Treasury do their estimates, the other regions of the UK have a different travel profile than we would have, but certainly the NICEP 55 million is, I think, reflective of the travel profile that you would get from Northern Ireland.
So, final point before Mr. Girvan, but before we even get to Europe to negotiate how much this might or mightn't cost us, we would have to get some figures, because we'd be obviously to the advantage of HMRC to say that it was X when it was really Y if they're calling the shots. So,
and if we were moving to a devolved context, for example, there would need to, if we were devolving the tax and setting our own Northern Ireland rate, there would have to be systems put in place to identify precisely then the duties that were raised in Northern Ireland. So yes, at the moment when we're having a discussion, there's some space between the estimates and there's room to discuss that. If we came to a position where we actually devolved it, it wouldn't be on the basis of these estimates. A system would need to be put in place for the Northern Ireland regime, and then the block adjustment would be based on that actual figure.
I like the word regime. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Just before we bring Paul in, can we return just to the Maud McDonald report? They're making the point that York Aviation made the assumption that 50% of any change in APD would be retained by airlines in the first year and 25% in the second year. And they're saying in regard to that it's equally reasonable to assume that no share of the impact of APD will be retained by the airlines given the increase in competitiveness within the industry. And a more conservative assumption would be that 25% of the value may be retained in year one, with all the impact passed on to passengers by year two, which would result in a total net loss to the local economy of 7.5 million rather than the 22.9. Is that a fair point that they're making?
I think that their assumption's too optimistic. In terms of the level of revenue that would be retained within the airline, that assumption and those decisions came from the consultations that Derry and York Aviation had with the airlines. Now, those were consultations undertaken on the basis of confidentiality, and whenever whenever York Aviation identified that specific 50% in year one, 25% in year two, it was on the basis of those discussions, and we talked quite a bit about the extent to which it would be retained, and if there would even be some could be retained on an ongoing basis. So would the airline seek to retain 10 or 15% throughout? So there was some discussion, and we ended up coming down on making the assumption that we did. I think that the assumption that Mott MacDonald are proposing there, where it's either that the full amount would be passed on immediately or even just 25% withheld in year one, it's too optimistic and doesn't reflect the nature of the conversations that were held with the
see when the duty was phased out in Dublin, what was the impact there? Is there something there we could look at to get a sense of what airlines would do?
We didn't look at what had happened in Dublin.
Again, it would probably, I would just to add, it probably would be difficult to unpick that, because obviously that would be a matter for the individual airlines, and there's a number of factors that influence on their pricing. So the effect that would have on the overall prices would be difficult to reveal, I would suspect.
Paul? It's to really come back to the point of transparency. I really think that there is an element of smoke and mirrors being put forward by HMRC, and that's we don't necessarily know the exact figures, so therefore we're not working with an exact science. We took a hit whenever we decided to inject £5 million out of our block grant to retain our long-haul flight to North America, and on the basis of that, I think, how sure are we that that was an accurate hit? That's one area, and why is it deemed to be state aid or taxation, European taxation rules that we might be breaking, or state aid rules, if we go down the route of trying to do what has happened? And genuinely, I believe, if you look at how Dublin Airport has grown over the years, there has probably been an element of state involvement in ensuring that that was seen as a key driver. That's why so many people, 43% increase over a year of transport coming from Northern Ireland into the Republic to fly out of Dublin. Why can we say that that's state aid? Why can that be not classed as state aid that they have given to ensure that that happens? Because it was public funding to improve the airport and to do all that.
I'll start with the point about long haul. The figure's closer to 2 million in terms of the block adjustment that we
were told it was 5.
5 was in the initial, when the initial costings, Treasury produced cost estimates, and they round to the nearest 5 million. In working,
Very good.
but in working with them, it's a point they made in response to Martin, we now have a default rate for long haul, and the airlines have to report to HMRC the number of passengers and the duty paid. So we have accurate figures for long haul that are supplied in terms of the amount of people travelling paying the Northern Ireland rate. So yes, when we're looking at these figures at the moment, pre any devolved position, there is a lack of clarity. I suppose the point I would make again is that we are engaging with HMRC along with our colleagues in the other devolved administration, Scotland in particular, on the methodologies that they're using in this HMRC regional allocation of tax receipts. So it's not something that we're just taking the report and going, right, those are the figures. We're going through the methodology with them. We're challenging that methodology and trying as much as is possible to agree the approach in which the taxes are allocated in this report for the purpose of producing this report.
I do think that we have probably missed a game here in relation to ensuring that we use the opportunity that people have. As Martin said, it's not a one-way street. Like, the road goes both ways. New routes have come into Belfast and are coming into international, and likewise, we need to be ensuring that we do retain those. And to do so, we have to make it. They have to be profitable routes as well. But on the basis of APD, the argument has to be made. No other region in the United Kingdom, and I'm wondering if there has been any calculation made of this, no other region in the United Kingdom has to compete where somebody can get in their car and drive to another area to take advantage of not having a APD. There's no other region. Scotland, they can't. Wales, they can't. It's just Northern Ireland. So we are unique on that basis, and I think there's a very strong argument for us to look at that. Was there any calculation made? And this is why I think we should have been making a calculation of the revenue lost with people who travelled from routes which were available to them from Belfast, but chose to drive to Dublin because they got a better rate. And I'd be honest, how many people from Northern Ireland travel to Florida for their holidays every year, and how many of them actually could fly from Belfast but are choosing to drive to Dublin, stay overnight in a hotel before they go, park a car in Bewley's, and on they go. And that's what's happening. That is exactly what is happening. And unfortunately, have we any calculation of how many that affects?
I'll pick up on the state aid point first, Paul. Maybe John can kind of follow up on the kind of the travel through Dublin. The state aid issue relates to the Republic of Ireland. We're able to do it because they're setting their own tax on this, so they can set their own tax rate as they see fit. In a devolved context, when we're departing from the UK rate, the rules are quite strict that if we're going to devolve it, we need to bear the fiscal consequences of that. So that's why we need to bear. There needs to be a block grant adjustment. So the situation is slightly different. The UK, as a whole, the government in the UK could reduce APD if they wanted, but if we were to do it separately, then we have to incur the block adjustment. So the ROI position is more analogous to the UK position as a whole, rather than ROI versus what we have the flexibilities to do here in Northern Ireland.
I suppose just your point about Dublin and the States, that there is no there's no APD applied. People will choose to use Dublin because there is the sort of connectivity that they provide that we can't provide. They've got pre-clearance, which we don't have the economies of scale to deliver. You have to have 400,000 passengers before the US government will even consider pre-clearance. And whenever they originally considered pre-clearance, it was to facilitate passengers. Now it's more about border control. But things are changing. You have Orlando, Thomas Cook, Virgin, Thomas Cook go to Las Vegas. So you're starting to see outbound leisure flights during the summertime coming from Belfast International. And those, I think those will increase. But those will increase to the point that it'll be sustained from a Northern Ireland economy point of view. We have 1.8 million people. The GDP figures are different here from they are down south. But you are starting to see movement. If there wasn't a direct long-haul APD variation, you wouldn't get any of those. As it is, we've got United, and there are increased opportunities. People can fly from here to Sharm el Sheikh, for example, whereas before they would have had to go to Dublin. So there are those benefits starting to come forward.
I think, Chair, as well, just in terms of you talked about, has there been a calculation carried out? In the analysis, we estimate that if APD was abolished, approximately 330,000, after when the full benefit had been passed on, approximately 330,000 people who are currently using Dublin would use Northern Ireland Airport. So that's built into part of the analysis, the APD.
I wonder, has any conversation taken place to ensure, because we always talk about the hub, the spoke, and if you did abolish, and I'm just thinking, if APD were abolished in Northern Ireland, it could potentially become a hub not just for Northern Ireland, but for UK as a hopper to other areas within Europe. What's to stop it? I know if you fly direct from Gatwick, sometimes, and you're flying to other regions, sometimes you stop off in Dublin and you sit back and say, why are we flying way back here to go back there? And that's what happens. I'm wondering if there's been a thought that might happen by some major airline decide to make Belfast, their hub, and as a consequence, they use that as a, and I'm thinking like KLM or some of them, but maybe they're too close to us and our doorstep. But
In terms of hub airports, airlines like small numbers of hubs so they can concentrate their activity. Given the size of the Republic of Ireland, given in population terms relative to Northern Ireland, the much bigger size of their economy relative to the Northern Ireland economy, there's much greater demand for connectivity and for flights flying out of Dublin. As a result of that, airlines don't think from an NI ROI perspective. It's an island, and Dublin presents a much more attractive hub proposition than Belfast. That's not to say that we couldn't become a hub in due course. But and similarly, there's one hub in mainland GB, Heathrow. Airlines, and what they found in some of the research that I looked at some time ago, where countries have tried to set up 2 hub airports in relatively close proximity to each other. It breaks down, doesn't work. In a sense, Dublin have stolen a march on us in achieving that hub status for the island.
So just add to what Gareth said, if you flew from GB and hubbed through Belfast for long haul, you would still be charged the long haul rate because there's
You're leaving as the
connecting
origin.
function. Now, if you flew from GB and then stopped here for 24 hours, then it'd be good for Belfast because you then get to spend a bit of time, but people don't do that. They want the through ticket, so you would still be charged your origin, so you'd still be charged the long haul rate, even though we wouldn't have the direct long haul rate applied here.
Can I finish off, Chair?
Bring Leslie in and then you would.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to make some points about the Dublin thing that Paul has just done, but I have to say, listening carefully to you, it seems to me that your sort of logic is that Dublin has already done it, we are in a poor relation, and we don't aspire to try to compete even. Is that unfair criticism?
No, that's not the case at all. Dublin's a challenge, it's an opportunity. We get a lot of our via traffic, our American visitors, for example, from Dublin. But the more direct access is always preferable. What we're looking to do is see if we can get as much direct access as possible. The UK, until recently, you couldn't do route development funds. The European Union changed the rules last year. The UK has been engaging with the Commission. They're about to get approval for a route fund, and they've run a competition. Which
Tell me how you're going to handle the economic magnet of Dublin going forward. What I'm hearing there is we've done it, we can't compete. Tell me something different.
But Northern Ireland's not looking to be a hub. What we're looking for is access into Scandinavia, for example, into Denmark, that will act then as an onward hub for the rest of Scandinavia. Access into Germany. We're not looking to be Dublin. What we're looking to do is punch at our weight effectively, or preferably above our weight. It's those. There are parts of Europe where we don't have the access, and it's getting access into those is where we need.
But you have to start with you have to have the inspiration and aspiration to move on to bring things better. It seems to me you're accepting the status quo, and therefore they've done it, so we'll maybe get something. I would like to be a lot more optimistic than that. And there was a comment earlier, the last point, Chair, direct comparisons with UK's GB mainland and England in particular. I think those are grossly unfair and miss a major trick. They have high-speed rail networks. We don't have them. And that's surely one of our arguments dealing with the European connection. We are an island off an island. We have poor infrastructure in that regard, and therefore, we need to be doing something different. We just can't lie back and accept it.
But just to clarify, the comparison with GB was a factual comparison. That is the fact that our travel profile and the travel profile we have as a population, we have to fly. Roughly speaking, 3/4 of our flights are within the United Kingdom. Roughly speaking, about a fifth of GB flights within the UK. We have to fly, but the fact is our profile is the lower cost budget type profile. We don't have a high long haul.
But with respect, you're looking at the wrong population. Dublin doesn't look at 1.8 or 4.4. Dublin looks at 6.4 in the island. I think you're looking at the wrong population. You see, of course, it's 1.8. Then Belfast would be as well, just folding up shop. But it's not. It's the entire island you're marking. Not at all, of course, but it is for Dublin. But I think you're looking at the wrong. Market. Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Leslie.
Thank you for that. No, but that's actually the point. That we are at a big disadvantage in infrastructure terms compared with GB. And never lose sight of that. I think it's vitally important, and that's part of our argument for improving the structures.
I suppose the one general point I would make is we are looking at ways to improve the circumstances. We are looking at ways to improve connectivity. There's a discussion around APD. It's looking at, is APD the most appropriate lever, or, as the research suggests, are there other options here that we can use to try and stimulate connectivity and improve the throughput in our airports? So I suppose if we just want to respond to that point, that, you know, where there's perhaps a lack of ambition or vision, you know, we want to identify the best approach that we can take to achieve what we would like to see happen.
It's
not that we're sitting,
because it wasn't coming across, I'll have to say.
yes, and I just wanted to make, because I know we're very much talking about the impact that, you know, a reduction in APD could have. So I just want to put that on the record, that it's not we're sitting happy to take the status quo, but it's what is the most appropriate way of addressing the challenge that we face, and that's collectively, I think, what the departments are looking at.
You're not ultra-conservative or pessimistic.
No.
Do you have a positive approach?
We have a positive approach, but we need to be, as Gareth says at the outset, very realistic. We're not Dublin, but we want Belfast, Northern Ireland to be the best that it can be in terms of its connectivity.
Glad to hear that.
I suppose before the economic crash, you had 8 million passengers in Northern Ireland airports. You've now 7 million. What we need to do is, those people that are using Dublin, get them to use Northern Ireland by providing the access that they're going to Dublin to get effectively. It's getting back to that 8 million figure, and then exceeding that 8 million figure. That's what the airports are out all the time, proactively. They're on the ground, they're knocking doors. We support them in doing that. There's not a lack of ambition there.
Glad to be reassured in that. Yeah, thank you.
Richard. You're getting full value today, I regard both Minister Hamilton and Minister Foster, who switched roles, as both being ambitious and high aspirations. That's why I'm so disappointed in this report, and that they accepted it, because I think this report has no aspiration, no ambition, treading water. And if you look just at our tourism industry, inhibited by APD, held back the area, in my view, this region discriminated against by APD. The type of response by Howard Hastings yesterday or the day before to go and invest $6 million of his own money in a new hotel, to build a new hotel, that's a sort of optimistic, ambitious, high-achieving approach I'd like to see from everyone involved in our tourism and hospitality industry, and that has to include connectivity. And this report to me speaks of pessimism. We're talking about doubling our tourism numbers in the years ahead, the great work that's going on, and yet we then say, but by the way, we're just going to tread water. We're going to mess around at the edges. In my view, it needs bold steps, and we may now be locked into this. Although we do with a new minister, maybe she will look at it anew, or he will look at it anew. But I think that this really speaks to me of low aspiration. So I remain disappointed. I don't want to love the conversation, but it is the most disappointing report I've seen in a long time.
If I could respond just very briefly, Chair. And I know Gareth had said at the outset that, you know, their role is to produce an independent assessment, and it's an independent assessment of what the economic impact would be. Now, it's saying that basically there'd be a small marginal benefit. Really, what we want to do is use the public finances that we have in the most effective manner. We all agree on the objective of trying to improve our connectivity as much as we can. If we say, you know, if it's a small possible benefit, you know, effectively, you know, being quite simplistic about it, if you put £1 in terms of reducing the block grant to abolish to reduce APD, you'll get £1 out.
I think it's an academic argument, because we need to spur to the international airport at Belfast. So what if they said in the block grant, by the way, we're going to negotiate with you. We don't even know what it costs. And by the way, when we estimated the last time, we were 100% out. We don't know what it costs. We'll estimate what the pain will be on your block grant. But by the way, here's extra money to invest in your infrastructure. So the block grant thing and where the pain would come and money coming in and coming out just doesn't add up to me.
But the, you know, kind of to follow on that point, you know, it's trying to find the most effective and the most productive way of tackling this challenge. So if it's put £1 in and get, you know, as Gareth says, it's basically the benefit is broadly equated to the cost. There's a small net benefit. It's effectively put £1 in, and that's £1 coming out of the public finances, which are paying for public services, which will deliver deliver £1 of economic benefit. What we would like to see is a mechanism where we get more of a return for our public expenditure. So, for example, on if there's the potential for an route development fund, £1 in there could arguably be more effective in delivering connectivity. So what I want to see is us putting forward options that are the most effective. APD is one option, and the assessment is saying here that it's only delivering a small benefit. What we would like to see is what's the best use of our limited public finances.
Well, we're not, Chair, I just feel that we're playing somewhat with a deck which is stacked against us because we don't know what the figures are, and we have to accept what HMRC tell us is our APD.
Well, in terms of the HMRC report, that's there, and the figures are there. But we're not just blindly plugging those figures in. Gareth and his colleagues in York have looked at the figures, have come up with an alternative scenario.
Which is not the figure that was given by HMRC.
Yes, and it's lower, and they have then run the analysis saying what would the benefit be and what would the case be if we were to run with those figures. So it's not that the analysis is just taking the HMRC figures as read. It's running a number of scenarios. And it's coming out saying that there's not a strong case on either the HMRC figures or the figures that have been produced by York and the University of Ulster. So I can assure the committee that we're not just blindly taking the HMRC figures. And on that point, as I said earlier, we are, along with colleagues in the other devolved administrations, working with them on this HMRC report to try and see if we can strengthen it and agree the methodologies that we're all more comfortable that we understand how these figures are arrived at.
But that's where I have a difficulty, because I think we're not dealing with rocket science. If there's a certain amount of money comes in, appreciate that they're telling you they don't know what region it comes from. It just comes into a big pot that they put it into. But can I tell you, they have the ability to tell you whether you owe 35 pence of tax or not. So as far as I'm concerned, if they can do that, they know exactly what's going on, and they can tell you to within a few pounds of where this is coming from. So they shouldn't be hitting us with figures which are grossly inflated whenever we ask for information. Grossly inflated. Now, I'm not saying that this is the route we'll have to go down, but I'm saying I would like to have some transparency and some clarity on where we're coming from. I don't like somebody telling me it's £5 million you're going to take to your block grant, and then whenever you do the final thing, it ends up at £2.5 million. Like, that's ludicrous. It's definitely far from level, and I feel that sometimes we are playing with a really stacked deck against us every time. Everything's held over there. Whitehall, they've got the control of what's going on, and they just feed you whatever they want you to know. They keep you in the dark and feed you certain things.
Certainly, Chair, in terms of the research, that we did, we absolutely did not just accept the HMRC numbers, which is why we developed our own estimates, and they're just over £20 million lower. So if a debate is going to start with Treasury about APD, I think our numbers are probably a place to start. I mean, it's the start of the journey. It's not the destination. But.
So just a wee quick point, and I know I was out for a lot of the debate, but just seems to me if this report had been written maybe 8 or 9 years ago, whenever money was a bit more plentiful, we'd have got a different type of report. I think because money is so scarce now and things are tight, we're looking at it on a different angle.
I don't know if I accept that. I mean, in terms of the analysis, the benefits are marginally greater than the costs. That would have been that's not a reflection of economic conditions now. I think it could be if we were in a situation where the minister in charge had more money, or there was less pressure on budgets, perhaps they could afford to do APD and something else. Whilst I think now you guys, the executive, are under increasing pressure to find absolutely the maximum out of every last pound. So I'm not sure that this report would have been materially different if it was done 8 or 9 years ago, but I think the ability for ministers to make expenditure decisions, they would have been freer to make different expenditure decisions, so they could have this and perhaps something else, whilst we're into well, no, we can't have both anymore, it's one or the other.
Okay, members. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks a million, guys. Good to see you.
And apologies for my even little phenomenon moment.
Okay, members, moving on to the recommendations from a study on identified adverse impact on civil service recruitment. Can I refer members to pages 138 to 151 of your pags, and remind members this issue arose from previous work carried out by Assembly Research on behalf of the committee and a subsequent independent study which DFP commissioned themselves into adverse impacts in civil service recruitment competitions. The purpose of today's session is to update members on progress towards implementation of the recommendations from the independent study. We just need witnesses.
Not happening. So sharp, isn't it? Nobody coming in, everybody going out.
If they say that's the right.
No promotion.
Right here.
Morning.
Morning, folks. Morning.
Members can welcome Mark Goodfellow, Head of Resourcing Division and Corporate Human Resources, Carmel McLarnon, Head of Appointments and Marketing, Corporate Human Resources, and Dr. John Mallon, Director of HR Consultancy Services at DISRA. Do any of you want to make some opening comments before we go to questions from members?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning. And can I begin by saying we very much welcome the opportunity to update the committee on the progress we're making towards implementing the recommendations arising from the study on identified adverse impact on NICS recruitment. And that's the first and last time I will use that rather clumsy phrase. I'm very conscious the committee has had sight of both the full report and in recent weeks the progress report. So I don't intend to canter over that in any great detail at all. But with your permission, Chair, what I thought would be helpful would be to reference 4 broad areas in my introductory remarks. Firstly, just to reference the key findings identified in the report. Secondly, the key themes from the 11 recommendations that were made. Thirdly, and most importantly, perhaps, what are we doing to implement those recommendations and to make progress? And then finally, a brief reference to the wider operating landscape in which we're considering this issue. Following that, Carmel, John and I would of course be happy to answer any questions committee may have. Before I turn to the 4 broad areas, I would like to make 2 important points. Firstly, to assure the committee of the commitment that we in the Northern Ireland Civil Service have in order to address any identified inequality or areas of adverse impact. We do take our equality obligations very seriously indeed, and I hope from what I say that can demonstrate that we're proactive beyond the formal compliance with Section 75 obligations. Secondly, and I do want to be very candid with the committee on this point, I think we all need to be very clear that it is unlikely and perhaps unrealistic that we would arrive at a position where we can eradicate completely all incidences of adverse impact. That's not to say we shouldn't strive to be in that place, and that's not to say that we're complacent. We're absolutely not. But one of the issues here is that it is incredibly difficult to prove causality. So it can be very clear when and where adverse impact incidences occur. Trying to address the root cause of that and identify the root cause can be incredibly complex. So I want to be clear with the committee on that point. So in that context, our focus absolutely ought to be on mitigating the risk, constantly refining our processes to make sure that we seek to reduce the effect of adverse impact where that happens. Moving then to the 4 broad areas that I mentioned. Firstly, the key findings in the report. Well, you'll be aware that the report concluded that as a whole, neither competitions examined, those are the 2 EO2 competitions in 2007 to 2011, adversely impacted any group significantly. The author also welcomed the extent to which the NICS does take its responsibilities seriously, and it welcomed the significant steps that we have already taken. Those steps include the development of bespoke tests, introducing a revised competency framework, providing a range of reasonable adjustments for candidates with disabilities, and importantly, making practice tests available in advance. So we very much welcome that strong endorsement of the commitment that we have shown, but there remain areas for improvement, and we also very much welcome those being highlighted for us. So turning to the identified areas of adverse impact from the report, Firstly, in relation to gender, males performed better than females in psychometric tests in both competitions examined. Conversely, females performed better than males at the interview stage in both competitions. On religion, Roman Catholics tended to score lower in tests than Protestants, but no difference identified at interview stage. In relation to age, in the 2011 competition, younger candidates were broadly more successful than those in the over 40 age bracket at assessment and testing stages. And at interview, younger applicants were less successful in 2011, but no difference identified in 2007 competition. And I draw that to the committee's attention just to emphasise how difficult it can be to prove causality where you have two different competitions but with very different outcomes. In disability, in the 2007 competition, there was no difference identified at all, but in 2011, candidates with disabilities tended to perform less well, both at test and at interview stages. No differences found for those with dependents. And in terms of the reasons for the differences identified, well, firstly, the authors of the report recognise that any adverse impact is, of course, unintentional. Secondly, they go on to suggest some very generic possible reasons around any testing mechanism where it could be down to the construct, the makeup of the tests. It could be down to how those tests are administered. But they also very quickly conclude that the NICS approach absolutely conforms to best practice. They do allude to potential issues around educational or cultural background, and those, of course, are incredibly difficult for the NICS in isolation to make any significant contribution towards. And ultimately, and it's important to stress this point, I think, ultimately the authors of the report, they conclude that it is very difficult to be certain about the underlying causes of the adverse impact in NICS tests, again, reinforcing the point I make earlier in terms of trying to link the outcome with the cause. And so it goes on to make 11 recommendations in total aimed at helping us tackle the effect of that adverse impact. I don't intend to go through the 11 recommendations, but they do fall broadly into 5 thematic areas. 5 of the recommendations relate to the actual tests themselves. 2 relate to monitoring and collection of data in order to inform the testing processes that we would develop. 2 relate specifically to the interviews, and the remaining 2 relate to how we understand the impact on people with disabilities. So on to my third area, what are we doing about it and how are we progressing against the recommendations and our action plan? Well, firstly, NISRA, led by Dr. John Mallon and his team, working closely with external psychologists, have developed bespoke tests for use in a range of general service competitions at AA level, AO level, EO2 and at grade 7 level. The development of these tests was informed by job analysis, the new NICS competency framework and discussions with post holders, and I think that's a very important point because that ensured that the tests adequately and properly reflected the roles that people were applying to undertake. Also importantly, those tests were trialled, pre-trialled, and that again was a specific recommendation. On a personal level, John knows that I took part and volunteered to do a test at one of the grade 7 interviews or assessment tests. I have to say personally, I was both reassured and impressed in terms of how closely the testing process aligned to the actual role that people would undertake at that level within the civil service. It's a trial, so I'm not sure. John can answer that.
Of course.
Yeah. So to date, those bespoke NISRA tests have been used in the most recent AO competition and with a small number of candidates in a fast stream competition. Overall, the AO competition, the gender composition of those appointed was very similar to the composition of those who had applied. However, in terms of community background, Catholic representation amongst those appointed was lower than the representation in the initial applicant pool. Candidates with a disability from that one also fared less well than those who did not have a disability. But overall, the level of adverse impact found in that new competition was substantially lower than previously associated with other tests, with no gender bias found at all, but further analysis will be undertaken. Corporate HR will also be reviewing its marketing strategy to encourage a broader applicant pool. That said, it is worth emphasising firstly that we will of course have limited opportunity to test that because we're in an embargo situation. And secondly, important to highlight just the level of the volume of interest there is in any general service volume competition at the moment. If we look at 2011, for an AO competition, we had in excess of 6,000 applicants with a very broad spread across gender and religion. In 2013, we had more than 15,600 applicants, again with a very good spread. So in general terms, we don't have a problem inviting and attracting a high volume of applicants. Corporate HR, led by Carmel and her team, is also commencing a strategic review of resourcing that will look at every aspect of assessment and selection, including tests and interviews. So we will review the format and the content of the interview process as part of that. And we're also firmly committed, and it's recognised in the report, to going to significant lengths to make sure that we do make a range of reasonable adjustments for those candidates coming forward with a disability, and we will continue to do that. So, Chair, the fourth and final area that I really want to touch on is that wider operating landscape within which we are considering this issue. Firstly, and I've said it before, we're absolutely committed to addressing any identified areas of inequality or adverse impact. But in so doing, this must be balanced with retaining selection processes that closely align to the requirements of the role. So we need to be very clear in terms of what are we asking people to do in the roles they're applying for, and making sure that tests ultimately conform to the merit principle, because we need to select the right person and the best person for the job. Secondly, our ability to test the rigour of the new suite of tests has been and will continue to be limited in the short to medium term by the current embargo on recruitment. Members will be aware that that embargo was introduced in November 2014 as one of a range of personnel interventions, including the voluntary exit scheme, to effect the required pay bill savings to live under the 2015 budget. So whilst the embargo on one hand could be seen as an opportunity to do more, we can't really test the relative success of the new tests until we're back into a recruitment situation. Thirdly, members will be very aware of the challenging current and projected future financial position, and so the less resource that's available, clearly the less ability we will have to undertake research and develop any additional new testing. But finally, I do want to just assure the committee once again of our commitment to tackling this issue of adverse impact. We are not and we will not be complacent on this issue. Yes, the operating landscape is incredibly challenging, but our progress to implement the report recommendations, and in particular I think the development of bespoke tests, signals how we want to continuously improve within the resources available to us. And we're also stepping outside of the terms of that report in terms of tackling this issue. So I've mentioned the review of strategic resourcing. We're also publishing a new equality, diversity and inclusion policy. So that signals again our ambition to move beyond formal Section 75 compliance. And there is a new focus on diversity right across the civil service, with a diversity champion having been appointed at permanent secretary level. Finally, Chair, we will review later this year the issue of marketing to the NICS. I've said earlier that we have no issue in terms of attracting a high volume of applicants, but where we identify any areas of underrepresentation, we will make sure that we take targeted attempts at remedying that, regardless of background. So in closing, I hope the committee find that helpful. I hope it assures you of the level of commitment that we have to tackling the issue, and indeed significant progress that we've made towards implementing the recommendations. And Carmel, John and I would be very happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mark. And can I start just by welcoming the work that you have done in response to this issue? It is substantial and is to be noted. Just in terms of, you referred to the actions being applied to large volume recruitment competitions. How is large volume defined, and what actions are taken to ensure that the smaller competitions are not also subject to the risk of adverse impact?
Okay, well I think, and Carmel can come in and correct me here if I get this wrong, I think in terms of large volume competitions we do look at where it's general service grade, so and at recruitment level, so you're looking at administrative assistant, administrative officer, executive officer 2, which is the first line management, and then promotion to grade 7, which would be at head of branch level. In terms of how we make sure that that same principle is applied to smaller competitions, we don't vary at all. So the same process would be applied to smaller competitions. I mentioned, for example, that bespoke tests had been used in the most recent fast stream competition, where you're looking at very, very small numbers, in terms of, what's the total number, was it 14?
It was 17.
17 tested. So the same principles would apply to very small scale competitions as the large scale competitions.
You also made reference to marketing as well, and the fact there may be limited opportunity in the time ahead. So what exactly will that entail?
Well, I mean, we haven't started that process yet, Chair, but in my own mind, what it would entail is having a clear idea what the NICS composition is, where there are identified gaps, and then undertaking some targeted measures. So, for example, if you look at the composition of the NICS, it is broadly comparable to the labour market based on the last census. But actually, when you look at some of the lower grades, for example, at AO and EO, there is underrepresentation from male Protestants. So that would signal an area for me where we might want to go and for example, engage with schools around that area. Some of the other areas where we actually have overrepresentation compared to the labour market in terms of people with disabilities, but underrepresentation in terms of people coming from ethnic minority backgrounds. So there's another clear target area where we might engage with umbrella organisations just to begin the conversation in terms of, is the NICS not seen as an attractive employer? If not, why not? What adjustments can we make and what promotion can we make to make that more attractive? So we haven't started on the project, but it will be a case of identifying the composition, where the gaps are, and seeing how we can plug those gaps within available resources.
Also, in terms of paragraph 7 of your paper, you make the point that the embargo on all recruitment and substantive promotion has impacted significantly on continuing progress in this area. And whilst that's true in terms of external and permanent recruitment, what's the position with internal competitions?
The position with internal substantive promotion is the same. So the embargo that was introduced in November 2014 applied both to external recruitment and substantive promotion internally. So the exceptions to that would be any temporary promotions. So yep. Temporary promotions is still permissible. And if at permanent secretary level a decision is made that there's an exceptional need for a promotion, but it is on an exceptional basis. But internal substantive promotion is subject to the same embargo as recruitment, Chair.
Adrian?
Thanks, Chair. You touched on the point I was going to raise about the embargo, but just on the embargo as well, Mark, how can you assure us that while the embargo is in place, that this will not be dropped away down the focus scale? How are you going to keep it up there and the focus on this whole report?
Well, I hope, Adrian, from the progress we're making against the action plan.
I meant to recognise that at the start of my question as well.
No, that's fine. I hope that does genuinely recognise that even though we're in a press pause mode in terms of formal recruitment, that we're not losing sight of this. That we have developed the bespoke tests. As soon as that situation is turned back on again, we will be able to deploy those tests. And we will use this opportunity, as I've said, through Carmel's lead on the strategic review of resourcing, and through later this year the focus on marketing and identifying what the composition is, where the gaps are. We can do that. So within the available resources we have, this is still sitting as a priority work area for us.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Leslie?
You mentioned there the scenario where internal promotions are also affected by the embargo. If in fact the voluntary exit scheme produces a large number of people tramping out the top end, surely you must take some action to rebalance the whole structure of the workforce. Well,
it won't result, Leslie, in a large swathe of people just going out at the top end, as you describe it, in the sense that we have modelled the voluntary exit scheme based on the numbers within grades, within departments that departments have told us. So departments have carried out their own workforce planning exercises. Each department has said to us, here's the optimum number of people at each grade that we need to leave. So it won't be a case of the most senior staff all exiting or the most junior or any. It has been carefully profiled by departments.
So it's actually limited specific numbers, you're saying?
It is, absolutely is, yeah, within each grade.
In case for a lot of people, getting near pension age, it may well suit, and obviously that would be a loss of experience and expertise.
Yes, it is potentially. It is potentially a loss of expertise, but again, I would come back to the point that departments have set a limit on the numbers to be released within grade, and that, of course, will have been informed at the departmental level by how much skill set, how much experience can we afford to lose, and it will be scaled to
those written on tables of stone.
Yeah, I mean, tables of stone is very topical given the election over the last couple of weeks. Are they written on tables of stone? I mean, this is a moving feast. People move within such a large scale employer. So, can I say to you that the figure we had from departments at the start is the same as it is now? No, it's not, and actually, nor should it be. It's absolutely right and proper that departments should keep a continual focus on this and say to us at any given point in time, we've reprofiled, we've looked at it again, we want to add 10 or we want to subtract 10. So it has been a moving feast.
Flexibility, yeah.
But members will be aware, we are at a point now in the voluntary exit scheme where selections are being made. So we within corporate HR have had to draw a line and say, we've got to go with your final figure, departments, and selections will be based on the most recent figure. But that has changed, rightly so.
Great, thank you for that.
Thanks. Okay, just to summarise then, you have accepted the recommendations from the independent study in whole or in part, and you've already been implementing various measures, including the development and use of bespoke tests. But in terms of those, when and how will those measures be fully reviewed and analysed to establish their effectiveness and minimising the potential adverse impacts identified?
Sure. I'm going to ask Carmel and or John to comment on that, but my view, Chair, is that at the point where those tests are deployed, so if we switch back on the recruitment process and if we run a competition for any of those grades, those tests will be used and they will be subject to analysis almost immediately thereafter, my sense. But John, Carmel, do you
Yeah,
want
I
to
mean, I
comment on that?
think as Mark said, before the embargo was introduced, we had already developed a number of bespoke tests for different grades. Some of those tests at the grade 7 level we have been able to use last year, and we will be able to use this year for the fast stream candidates who are within the NICS in terms of their assessment to grade 7 level. So again, we are using bespoke tests there and monitoring the outcome and refining those tests as appropriate. Mark mentioned the strategic review of resourcing as well. That's a project which we're also taking forward while the embargo was on and while we have this window of opportunity to look at how we resource and recruit within the civil service to see is this how we want to still continue in the next 4 to 5 years. So we're looking at things like job roles, the possibility of moving away from the generic grade, general service, or one size fits all, to looking at more specific job roles such as HR, finance, etc., and then tailoring the selection and recruitment to that. So we're taking some work forward across the service on that. We've also introduced a new competency framework into recruitment from April this year. We've continued to work on reasonable adjustments and reviewing our policy on that in terms of disabled applicants. And we continue to work closely with NISRA in terms of monitoring previous tests that we've carried out and working to implement any recommendations there. So we'll continue to keep the plan under review, and I would imagine continue to report against the recommendations.
It is, Chair, an incredibly complex area in the sense that in one of the competitions there was one subgroup, for example, performed less well in relation to one aspect of checking. So it was for an AO role where a high proportion of the role was going to be around checking information and checking the accuracy of information. One subgroup performed less well on that. In order to remedy that potential adverse impact, you would then have to change potentially the construct or the scores of that element of testing. But in so doing, then you're diluting the relevance of the test to the actual role applied for, and that, I guess, is the tightrope that we're walking on with John's colleagues in NISRA and psychologists, trying to balance that. The outcome, if that suggests adverse impact, we need to address that, but we can't dilute the strength of the test in terms of making sure that it absolutely aligns with the role applied for, so that we get the best person. John, is there anything you want to?
Yes, the approach that we have is one of really of continuous improvement. So when you run a test, the NICS would differ from most other large employers because we would do very detailed analysis of the tests. Because in these occasions we have developed the tests, we are in a position to change the tests and modify them. So it's a process of doing our very best to make sure the test measures what's required in the job, using our knowledge of adverse impact to minimise the risk of adverse impact in developing the test, both in the style and the content of the test, but then actually using the test, monitoring what happens, and then be brave enough to recognise, well, we're seeing an issue here that we maybe quite understand why there's a group difference there, and then moving on to try a different style or approach to the test to try and address adverse impact. So it is a process of continuous improvement, continual monitoring and improving what we're doing.
Thank you. And then in terms of reporting to the committee again, when would you plan to update the scale and progress?
Entirely in your hands. I mean, we're happy to come up at any stage. I mean, what might be helpful is to give you another progress report in writing in a few months' time, perhaps, and then come up on the back of that and update you in terms of where we are, if that's helpful.
Okay, members?
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, by way of conclusion, can I suggest that committee agrees that having considered the recommendations arising from the research and the actions taken by the department, the committee is content that the department has responded positively on this matter?
Yeah.
Agreed. Correspondence?
Okay, I'll just pick out items of correspondence requiring committee decisions. Just for noting, the head of the civil service has agreed to come to the committee to brief it on the wider public sector workforce restructuring project, and that will be, I think, is scheduled for the 10th of June. Corresponded at page 156, DFP responding to an issue that was raised by a member of the public to the committee regarding a potential delay in the Education Authority pay increment. So DFP is basically explaining that the delay isn't on its part. So just need to seek agreement there, Chair, for forwarding that correspondence to the Education Committee and the original correspondent for information.
Agreed.
Then there's correspondence from DFP at page 160 of the pack in response to the EDI committee that is undertaking an inquiry into economic growth and job creation and had written to all the departments for returns. DFP is not making a return, so it's just to forward that to the EDI committee for information. The inquiry has deliberately excluded from its terms of reference the setting of the rate of corporation tax, because that falls more to this committee, Chair. Then finally, correspondence at page, just refer members to page 213 and 214 of the pack. Members will recall the Consumer Council, the committee had agreed to, in conjunction with the ETI committee, to host a stakeholder event on bank branch closures on the 26th of May, now, which would be also facilitated by the Consumer Council. But in the meantime, the Council has identified a development in GB that could affect the situation in terms of a bank branch closure protocol has been agreed and will take effect from the 1st of May. And there's details about that on page 214 of the pack. Now, the 4 main banks in Northern Ireland haven't yet signed up to it, but that seems to be in progress. The Consumer Council's proposing to might be better to postpone the event until the autumn or winter, because it would be in a more informed position in terms of how that's working, how it might be adjusted or whatever in Northern Ireland, and therefore potentially more productive. So it's just to take the members' views if they're content enough, and I can liaise with the Consumer Council about rescheduling it in autumn, winter.
Yeah. Agreed.
Chair, just in the back of that, can I just say about, the rural areas have been hit the most with the bank closures, as you would know, Chairman, and the post office seem to be stepped up to the mark to fill that gap. The person's telling me it's even handier now to walk into the post office than it was whenever the bank was there and transfer money or do whatever you want. So maybe at some time we should get a briefing from the post office actually to see what service they are offering, especially to those people in the rural community. Because, we seem to be down on the banks, but we never really give in to the post office any regulation at all for doing what they are doing.
I could maybe schedule that closer to the stakeholder event
Yeah,
so that
fair
it
enough.
informs the committee of the services. Yeah. Okay.
No, Chair, which banks have agreed. It says here that all of the big four NI banks, not all have accepted the protocol. Do we know which ones have or which
Not
ones
at this
haven't?
stage.
Okay.
No. That's all the correspondence.
Forward work programme, pages 219 to 222. In terms of the visit to Edinburgh, due to membership changes in the committee, a space is now available for the forthcoming committee visit on Wednesday the 27th of May. As members know, this is to discuss issues relating to the committee review the operation of the Barnett formula. Can I ask members, other than those confirmed, to express an interest through the committee by close of play today? Members content the work programme is updated to reflect any agreements made today. Agreed. Any other business? Next meeting is next Wednesday at 10.
Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee.